I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. I apologize if the sound is a little different than what you are used to. I am recording in a different space. We'll see if I keep this one or if I go back to the old one. It's a little, I don't know, maybe a little noisy in here. So this week I am speaking with Stephanie Yu Duhem, an Austin-based poet, about her really funny and insightful essay, Only Bad Poems Go Viral, which ran in Do Not Research on Substack. We talk about that. We talk about Substack, X, Twitter, Instagram, viral poetry in general, contemporary poetry. She also surprised me in that she's wouldn't commit to being called an avant-garde or experimental poet, but is closer to that than most of the people I speak to on the show. And the way she spoke about what she wants from poetry really reminded me of the way religious poets talk about poetry. So it was really something. Yeah, it was a strange and surprising conversation. She was an extremely good sport coming on this weird podcast of ours. So you can pre-order her book. Her first collection is coming out soon from House of Vlad. Is that House of Vlad? Is that the name of the press? That's a great name for a press. Shit. Yeah, House of Vlad Press. Good God. All right. So it's called Cataclysm Moves Me, I Regret to Say. A very good title. And it looks terrific. I mean, at least the cover image on here it's just a really good design. This is what Ernie Hilbert pointed out. Hip avant-garde poets always have better looking books, and this is certainly the case with Stephanie. So Cataclysm Moves Me, I Regret to Say by Stephanie Yu Duhem. You can pre-order that now. I will put a link in the show notes. Just before getting to that conversation, though, I told Alice I didn't want to do a PSA the other week when we spoke about sex and sexism, but I'm going to backpedal and offer a PSA now. So when my wife was in college, her younger brothers were in high school, still living in a really small town in the South, near the border of South Carolina. Her dad was a very respectable small town physician. I mean, still is very respectable. He's a retired physician now, and drove around in a very economical and ergonomical Chrysler minivan, I think it was. But her brothers played this joke on them where one day one of them slapped a big magnet on the side of the van, and it was a purple magnet in big purple cursive letters. It was big. This was like 2 or 3 feet wide. The sticker. They slapped it on the side of the minivan, and it read, "Pimpin' ain't easy." And they thought it would be funny for him to drive around town for a day without realizing that he had "Pimpin' ain't easy" on the side of his small town physician minivan. My wife came home from college for a break. She was the one who found the magnet, and when she pulled it off, there was a very perceptible layer of dust around it. Like it had weathered on there because it had been on there for months and months and months and months, and he had just never noticed. This is the way I feel about this PSA. Like, somebody should have told him. It was like, it wasn't his fault. Somebody should have told him. So there is a magazine I have heard very good things about. I have heard really wonderful things about the editors of the magazine. I was planning to submit. I'm kind of cooking poems in my kimchi hill, so they're not ready yet. But I was planning to submit. I know people who've submitted. It's very well respected. I just learned, though, today about this practice they have. And I feel like it's like the Pimpin' Ain't Easy magnet. Like, they don't know how offensive and obnoxious this is. Like, they don't realize. They clearly, these are decent, smart, thoughtful people. They are doing something so shitty, and they don't know that it's shitty. So I'm just going to mention this practice. I've mentioned something like it, I think, on The Secret Show before. But what they do is they will reject you. And then along with I've read for magazines at several different levels. I was an intern for Verse, I think it was just called Verse, back in college. And we were assigned stacks of poems. We would read them. We had to write up comments. That was how we got class credit for it. So they have people doing this. And they have, they're very responsible. They have 3 people read every submission. That's great, right? Like, that's really thorough. That's really responsible. And they have them write up their comments. Okay, great, fine. But then When they reject you, they send you the comments. No, no, oh my God, you can't do that. You can't, you can't, no, you can't do that. You do, the rejection is the comment. What you can do is that you can send a comment if the comment is, this was really great. We loved this. We enjoyed this, but it's not quite right for us. That's acceptable. Also acceptable is, we're going to publish this, but we have some notes and we wonder if maybe you could make some adjustments. That's totally acceptable. What's not acceptable is, we're not going to publish it, and here's what we think is wrong with it. No, you do not get to do that. That's not that's not the relationship you have with the writers you are not publishing. So I'm just putting this out there. Good, decent, God-fearing magazine editors, just know that that's not acceptable. If it wasn't already obvious to you, and it clearly wasn't in this case, just know you don't do that. And if you know a good, upstanding, decent, small town editor who is doing this, you gotta tell him. He's got spinach in his teeth. He's got Pimpin' Ain't Easy on his minivan. You've got to let him know. No, you cannot send critical comments to writers whose work you are rejecting. All right, that was my PSA for the day. But I hope you do enjoy my conversation with Stephanie You Do Him. I certainly did. Apologies, Stephanie, for this non sequitur, but I think everybody is really going to like this. And please do go pre-order her book, Cataclysm Moves Me, I Regret to Say, from House of Vlad Press. God, they have a great logo too. Damn, come on, formal poetry, get with it. Step up your game. And go also read her essay, Only Bad Poems Go Viral. But first, listen to my conversation with Stephanie You Do Him. Oh, the reason on the podcast app and on the website it lists her as Moon and Mouth is that she wants to get jobs someday and doesn't want to be associated with ridiculous poetry podcasts. But Moon and Mouth is her handle on Twitter and Instagram. You can find her at both of those. I will put links in the show notes as well as to her personal website. Here is Stephanie You Do Him, aka Moon and Mouth. And no, I'm not doxing her. It's not a secret. It's just she just asked me not to put her name on the notes, which is totally reasonable, and I was happy to comply. All right, here's Stephanie You Do Him, author of Cataclysm Moves Me, I Regret to Say.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions.
Please, yeah, please.
Tell me about this podcast. Like how long ago did you start it? I mean, how did you find your audience? How did you find my essay?
Yeah, I found your essay through actually right before I deleted the Substack app from my phone because it was getting
Hmm.
so like the Substack thing that is whatever part of it looks like Twitter was driving me crazy. So I just got rid of it.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
right before I deleted it, it recommended your essay, which I'm glad it did.
Oh, right on.
And I do like that. I do like I like that part of it. If it were just
Hmm.
recommending good essays, but it's like the notes or whatever where people post little quips and things, and it just feels like
Yeah.
it's a
Hmm.
I don't know
It
what
was too
version.
social
Yeah.
media for you. Like you
Yeah, I
wanted
don't know exactly
pure.
because I don't. Well, it's not even pure. It's just like I know that it isn't. When I have been on social media, it has not
Mm,
reflected well on me or vice versa. So like
sure. Yeah.
yeah, I tend to do better without it. But yeah, if it were just like nerdy newsletter recommendations and essays, that part like here's some new good essays about stuff that might interest you. That sounds great.
Yeah.
That part I like. So I was glad. Is there, because this is like the Do Not Research is a venue that has a lot of different authors. Is
Yeah.
this a place you will regularly publish? I know you've published essays in a number of different places.
No, so do not research. I forget how it first came to my attention, and I think it has a little bit more purchase in the visual arts world, or like the video art, the film
Yeah.
world, as opposed to, necessarily poetry. But
Sure.
it's kind of an internet culture research Substack.
Okay.
And so they put out like an annual call for essays, criticism, regarding like any aspect of internet culture. And I've been, sort of watching over the past few years, like, yeah, the collision of like social media dynamics with popular poetry, so
Yeah.
I don't know, that just kind of sparked in my mind, and I was like, oh, I should write something for it. But Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like a very fun and engrossing
Mhm.
article, and it's just such a terrific, excuse me, title that immediately I was thinking through like 'cause part of your thesis is that a large part of what seems to propel poems to virality is a
Mhm.
dual response.
Yes.
Like
Hmm.
people on,
Yeah.
and in my mind, there's sort of the responses on one side is like, finally, somebody is saying that. And then on the other side, it's
Hmm.
typical. Look at this,
Yes, exactly.
and I
Yeah.
did like part of me did have a like, finally,
Yeah.
thank you response when I
Yeah.
saw just the headline of your article. And then I was glad because it was not precisely the argument I had anticipated. It was a slightly different one, which was good.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, but yeah, it makes me curious to very briefly answer your question before I started this in 2001, sorry, 2001, 2021.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, it just as a like completely in the wilderness of the poetry world, like not having like
Yeah.
I wasn't publishing anywhere, I wasn't
Hmm. Hmm.
doing readings. I live in a small town in the South. I'm not like I was sort of totally nowhere, and so it was mostly just like a thought an opportunity to talk about poetry in a way that I would find entertaining if I were a stranger, and then it has allowed me to talk to a lot of different people, as not all of whom are middle-aged Catholic men, but apparently like a reasonable number of which are, and women, actually a lot of Catholic women as well. But it's like it's also just made me really interested in different poetry scenes. Like
Yeah. Hmm.
one of the woman who started working with me on it, Alice lives in Melbourne, Australia, and there's like
Hmm.
a specific like queer Melbourne poetry scene that she like knows very well. It's just totally like I would
Yeah.
never have intersected that,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I, like reading some of your poems and just getting a sense of like just some of the reference points you had in like
Yes.
I had never heard of any of the viral poems you mentioned
Yeah.
because I'm not in the right places for them. But of course
Right.
they got a
Yeah.
lot of attention. They were
Mm.
genuinely
Yep.
viral, but it like the kind of a tertiary interest I had in reading this was like, oh, what world is like
Yes. Hmm.
because I got the impression both that like here were some poems that were from a certain patch of Twitter poetry world
Yes. Hmm.
that you're aware of, but
Yeah.
that is
Hmm.
not actually your turf, and you have a slightly different
No, my patch
realm.
is the patch that makes fun of that other patch.
Okay, all right, okay,
So,
like
yeah,
snarky versus earnest, or cringe, or
sure.
okay.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, but
Please, well, yeah,
I mean, should we like sort of recap the essay
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
folks
That's
who
like
aren't familiar with it?
yeah, that's an excellent idea. So this is an essay you published in Do Not
Hmm.
Research,
Hmm.
which, as you said, is an online. It's a Substack venue that publishes work from lots of different authors, mostly on internet culture, not specifically
Hmm.
poetry. Your essay is
Hmm.
Only Bad Poems Go Viral. And
Yeah.
it makes that case, I think, persuasively. And as I said, like in a way that was different than my intuitive, what I anticipated. So yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
do you want to give
Yeah, sure.
yeah, an
So
overview of your argument?
yeah, yeah, so like I mentioned, I'd sort of been observing this phenomenon for some time on Twitter, which is where I primarily encounter other writers. Um, I should say where I primarily encounter other writers that I don't know in real life. Like
Okay.
I do have an Instagram, but it's like it's mostly, I live in Austin, so it's mostly Austin-based friends, and I do know a lot of Austin-based writers. But that one is definitely, that's a little different. That it's a totally different world than Twitter, which is where you sort of send thoughts out into the ether amongst strangers, and sort of clamor for attention in the vast din. Um,
Yeah.
there. So basically I've been very online since 2020 actually. Like, I got online first during COVID, and very much did not know at all any of the scenes or patches or anything like that. In fact, I came to poetry quite late.
Okay.
I only started reading and writing poetry, in my late 20s. And then, got into an MFA program, which was exactly when COVID hit. So, the first year of my MFA was totally online. So then I was like sort of just looking for community. So went onto Twitter, found a lot of, writers, but then, sort of like became more active on it over time. But what I noticed, especially in the last, I would say, I mean, it's ongoing, but there just seemed to be a spate of these in 2024, where just a bunch of poems that were, sort of in this talky free verse, prose poetry format, that went super viral, like at first for being good, right? Like they would rack up like millions of views, tens of thousands of likes. But then inevitably there would be a massive backlash. So for folks who aren't familiar with, well, I guess it's called X now, but who aren't familiar with that platform, you can quote like the previous person and add sort of like a cutting comment or a diss,
It's like
or
it
something
like it adds a place
snarky.
for a caption for you to
Yeah,
say, like, so it's
exactly.
like when you're quote tweeting, you're not necessarily promoting, or like
Hmm.
you're just saying, like, you're pointing at something.
Yeah, yeah. So like, I mean, like if you've been on like Tumblr, I mean, it's not like completely novel territory, but like, yeah, like you'll see the original post, but then you'll see this person's like snarky comment on top of that. Of course, it actually does end up driving traffic, right, to the
Right,
original
right,
post
yeah,
as
yeah, yeah, yeah.
well. But so anyway, these poems like they kept going viral for being good, and then they would go double viral for being bad. And so it kind of just made me think like, okay, what is going on here? Like, why are these poems so polarizing, with people who like absolutely love it and think it was the most brilliant, incisive thing ever, and then other folks who are like, I some of the commentary, that I because I screenshot a lot of tweets inside this essay, but some of the commentary is truly very cutting. I'll just read some of them
Yeah,
just to
yeah,
give a
please. Because
flavor, but
the people who hated these
yeah,
poems
yeah,
clearly enjoyed them as much as the people who loved them. They just enjoyed hating them.
yeah. They're haters, but um, who was it that said it doesn't matter if you're a hater, like that you're still a fan?
Right, yeah,
But
yeah. You're
yeah,
still a connoisseur. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, so here's some of the quote tweets on some of these like free verse poems. Poets born after 1993 can't write. All they know is rupee cower, free verse, senseless overuse of enjambment, aphorisms, be bisexual, use slam voice, and lie.
The lie feels like it's like the note where you feel like, wait, was this some personal narrative sneaking in here? Like,
Well,
was there
that's
something going
that's
on with
kind
you?
of that's part of a
Is that a
meme
thing I'm
phrasing.
unaware of? Okay.
Yeah, it's part of a meme phrasing,
Oh, okay.
like a mimetic. Yeah, it's like a thing.
All right. All right.
Like
This is
X
where
and
I'm
Y.
not tuned in enough
Yeah.
to read this precisely.
You
Yeah, there
know,
was the guy who had it's like the classic like vaudeville setup. Yeah, people are shitting on this for being bad and having no concept of meter, form, rhythm, or structure, and being not poetry, but they fail to appreciate that the sentiments it expresses are also hackneyed and trite.
yeah.
These are people who are who are thrilled to have something to hate this much.
This other one I think is also interesting and timely. This was a quote tweet of a poem that expressed displeasure about AI.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the original poem was titled "For a Student Who Used AI to Write a Paper."
Would
Um,
you just because that one's very,
yeah,
very short? Would you read it
yeah,
for us, please?
yeah. So okay, this is one of the poems that I use as an example in my essay, but this one again went super viral, first for being good and then for being bad. So the poem is titled "For a Student Who Used AI to Write a Paper." Now I let it fall back in the grasses. I hear you. I know this life is hard now. I know your days are precious on this earth. But what are you trying to be free of? The living, the miraculous task of it? Love is for the ones who love the work. So,
Sure,
um,
it's
so, so,
perfectly
so,
nice. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, this quote tweet was like, humans working hard to prove that they can make art that's somehow even worse than AI slop.
Yeah, it does. It does read like not unlike AI slop. Like
Hmm.
ASLab would like have it would have like a little more weirdness that didn't quite make sense, but it's not that like I having like just read a ton of AI poems for this
Uh-huh.
study. Like this could fall right into there. Like it's a
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean, I think that's what's so interesting too about, that one is just AI has gotten better at writing poems, and it is at the point where it can, write like not like a transcendently good poem,
no,
but it
no,
can
no,
write like a
no.
mediocre, competent poem
Yeah,
that
yeah. Like
could
it can
be
write a
published.
successfully trite
Mhm.
poem.
Yeah.
Like a poem that like successfully sort of snaps a
Mhm.
mousetrap of cheap emotion for the reader.
Yeah.
So, and you identify sort of like Aristotle's six elements of tragedy. You identify like the six elements of
Mhm.
viral poetry. Do you want to
Yes.
talk through what some of these are? Because yeah, there's some I had some questions about, but it was just like I thought it was a good breakdown of like you don't have to have all of these,
Hmm.
but sort of the more you have, the more like it's hard to
Hmm.
find a truly viral poem that does not have at least a lot of these.
Yeah. So I looked at a few different poems that went viral in 2024 that had this sort of dynamic. And so here's the thing, like I've like a Twitter group chat for poets. And we this is where we kind of like workshop and sort of look at stuff online
Do
and
you like share your own work sincerely as well on that, or is it just mostly like look at the stuff I found?
oh, it's both.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. It definitely it's both. I mean, I think well, we can get a little into this later, but I think you can learn from any instance of poetry.
Yeah, oh yeah,
You
for
know what I
sure.
mean? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and there's who's to say that you shouldn't sort of look at examples that,
Oh no,
that
I'm all for
yeah.
both of those. I was just curious how you use it. Like if you can like for like mix the two worlds at once, because it feels like it would
Yes.
be the challenge would be like in order to share poetry in a like with friends and kind of early readers, there's a certain degree of like vulnerability that's
Hmm.
required there, which is slightly different than the tone, like in my various group texts of like, look at this fucking asshole, like it's
Yes.
a slightly different mode to be in.
Well, we just do it all the time, and it'll be like, look at this jerk, and it'll be like, what do you think of my?
Think of my deeply sensitive and
Yeah.
personal portrait of my dead mother. Yeah.
Okay, but the six elements that I identify as like being triggering to poetry readers, and making a poem more likely to go viral, first for being good and then for being bad. So one of these elements is mixing the mundane, like the everyday, sort of quotidian life stuff, like prescription drugs, smartphones, pop culture references, with profound, like weighty emotional issues, philosophical issues, political issues. Yeah, so I mean, you see this a lot in contemporary poetry, and
This was the one I had a little
yeah,
bit of question about. Like,
yeah,
there's mundanity, and then it feels like in some cases it's like
mhm,
there's something like it's like not just mundanity, but like trivia or like
yeah,
like sometimes it's consumerism, sometimes it's like it's dumb little rituals of modernity. Because there's mundanity and like I feel like there's a lot of classic lyric poetry is mixes mundanity with I always want to read yours as rhyming as mundanity
mhm.
with profanity, which is not what it is. It's mundanity with profundity. I feel like there's plenty of old poetry. I mean, that's like most of Shakespeare's sonnets or mundanity and profundity.
Mhm.
But there is something you're putting your finger on something about like picking up some little thread of either contemporary technology or
Mhm.
consumer. It's like some dumb
Mhm.
aspect of modern life
Yeah.
becomes shockingly elevated in a sudden way. There's something about, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say exactly what it is, but I think you have your finger
Yeah.
on something here.
No, that's a really great point. And you're totally right. It is, well within the purview of poetry to be like, consider this butterfly and now death,
Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah.
you're totally right. But there's something about the way that contemporary poets throw in like a reference to Xanax or Lady Gaga,
Yeah.
and then move on to, you know, I don't,
Yeah.
I,
Is
you
it like
know, like
there's
genocide.
like
Yeah.
it's like proving your bona fides, or like part of me made it.
Mhm.
I was also thinking that that one of the tones that I feel like I pick up in some of these viral poems is one of like, watch me
Mhm.
turn the mundane into the profound. Like
Mhm.
there's something almost like it's not just doing it,
Mhm.
it's making a point, it's making a show of doing it, sort of announcing that you're doing it. There's
Mhm.
something about a lot of these poems that does feel like it's not just the high windows, it's
Mhm.
a like, stop everybody, listen, I've got something profound to say about this jug of Purell.
And I think, yeah, a lot of folks find that very obnoxious.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
The same, like
yeah.
people like it, and then people really, really
Yeah.
dislike it. I'm
Right. Right.
curious about the people who dislike it with a great intensity. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like people, like,
Well,
because there are people who think like
mhm.
modern life shouldn't appear in
Yeah.
poems,
Mhm.
like brand names shouldn't appear, technology, like no technology, from the earth, from the Industrial Revolution on, should appear in poems. That seems like, yeah,
You
that's
know what's funny? Because when I first got into poetry, I just bought like poetry, almost like 101 how-to craft
yeah,
books
yeah,
off
yeah.
the internet, and I just worked through the exercises, and started writing poems, publishing them, and then went into the MFA. But the very first book that I ever like craft book that I read was this little known book called Writing Metrical Poetry.
Oh,
And
who was that by?
I don't know the name, but
Oh,
it was very good, and it really taught me a lot. Because I kind of figured, I was like, before I start going off the rails and making references to Xanax and Lady Gaga, I should be able to write like metrical poetry first.
you were
Um,
an outlier, though. Most people do this. William
yeah.
Bear, who I know, yeah,
Hmm.
I know a little bit. Who's a yeah, he's very good and very uncool, like unhip, but like very well
Yeah.
respected, I
Hmm.
think, by people who know. I mean, I'm glad it was good. I'm surprised that that was your impulse. I mean, I'm glad it was. I think it's probably,
Hmm.
I think you're probably right that like you should, write in whatever, wild range of styles
Hmm.
and experiments you want, but like there is at least some value in learning some of the fundamentals.
Yeah, which is why, I was kind of like, obviously when you reached out to me and I kind of looked up your background, and I thought it was interesting that you were in the sort of yeah, like in the formal poetry world, because that is now like a very small, I guess, part of the
It's
overall
been
poetry world.
very
Yeah.
small,
Mhm.
very uncool. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I that's where I started too. Well, I don't know. It was kind of weird. This is going a little bit off topic, but
That's
when
all
I
right.
got into poetry, it was like a mix of, watching YouTube videos of spoken word poets,
Right.
which is the way that a lot of young people get into poetry, and I don't begrudge that at all. I
No,
think
no,
it's
no.
actually very, effective, powerful, moving. But then obviously over time, it kind of sickened. I kind of grew tired of almost like this trauma farming aspect, like this perform,
Yeah.
like it kind of turned me off. And then I turned to page poetry, and looked at, like, yeah, like got this metrical poetry book and was like, let me figure out what this is all about. But sorry, the connection back to your comment is
Yeah,
that when
yeah.
I read that book, one of the advice one of the things that it said was, just don't ever make a reference to anything pop cultural, because it will
Oh,
be
right,
dated, and then
because it
your readers
expires. Yeah,
won't,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
your readers
yeah,
won't know what you're talking about, which is, it is a little crotchety, because
yeah.
like,
Yeah,
I mean, I read
yes.
old ass poems all the time and have no idea what they're talking about, and
Right.
just
That's what
look it up,
footnotes are
or
for, you know? If it's a good
or
enough, if it's a good enough
yeah,
poem,
right.
then
They'll
your poem
transcend
becomes the amber that preserves it. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted your train of thought. Take us through these six elements, and how they work, because I do think it was really insightful, this list you put together.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So to recap, the first element was mixing the mundane with the profound. The second element is using a contemporary form. So again, talkie free verse, prose poetry, or spoken word can be very triggering to people on social media. They'll be like, oh, this is not real poetry because it doesn't have end rhyme, or it doesn't have
Right.
meter,
I want to just, I want to hear more about those people. But
Mhm.
finish your list. I mean, yeah,
Okay.
just bookmark that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll put a pin in that one.
Yeah.
The third one, the third trigger is signaling a political in-group.
Mhm.
So, like one of the examples that I put in this essay was a poem. It was called, let me scroll down. There's laundry to do and a genocide to stop. So
Yeah.
obviously that one's like very politically fraught, but not in multiple ways, because they also, it manages to work in a reference to masking,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
for COVID reasons in
Right.
2025, which again is very, like
Yeah.
polarized at this point. So anyway, like those types of political markers can be very triggering. The fourth trigger is urging a moral or therapeutic takeaway.
Yeah.
So just building to a lesson at the end, essentially, you
Yeah.
know. The fifth trigger is being cringe in a way. So just something that's sentimental or tropey, like overly earnest and unself-conscious. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Which I think you did describe that pretty well, that it's like taking seriously something that your audience probably has a hard time taking seriously. Like like Elliot talking about an emotion in excess of the occasion.
mhm,
Or like, I mean, or with tropes or cliches, like they're sentimental because the devastating Tolstoy line was like, oh,
mhm.
the reason that like teenagers are always having such intense reactions to art is that they just haven't ever read, like, they've never read this cliche before, and so they think it's mind blowing. But all the rest of us are rolling our eyes because we read it 100 times.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep,
but you
absolutely.
like being cringe somehow is like
Mhm,
essential. It's like the ambergris. Like it can't
mhm.
work without some version of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but yeah, that can just set people off. And then the last trigger is kindling generational divides. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
some generations, I mean, just, will find something cringe versus profound. This kind of goes to what you were saying about like age, like the age when you read something. But even like, for instance, this poem about using AI, you know,
Yeah,
that's an example where like older folks who didn't grow up with AI might think that is kind of a profound insight, whereas like Gen
right,
Z thinks like that's just, again, that's crotchety. That's cringe to
right,
be
right,
like,
right.
to be clutching your pearls about that.
Yeah,
So
is I mean it the point stands either way, but is I'm just curious, is Faisano young or old or middle aged or
I think, oh my gosh, oh
let
my
me
gosh,
look it
let's
up.
look. I
Yeah.
feel like he's in his 40s or 50s, and he's like
Okay,
an
that would make
academic.
sense.
He's an academic poet. He's not like he's not like, yeah, he's 42.
42. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he's like he was born like 1 month before me. Okay. Yeah. All right. That makes sense.
Mm,
He is what Zoomers mean when they say okay boomer, or they used to say that, right? Like what they actually mean is like an elder
yeah.
millennial.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is yeah. So that yeah, and it's all the worse in a way for like if it were just straight ahead in its griping, it would be less cringy than it is for sort of taking a kind of a performatively magnanimous response to it, like, oh, you children, you don't understand. So
Yeah.
perhaps someday you will. Did we get? I'm sorry. Did we get through? Yeah,
Yes.
kindling generational divide.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was like your point was like the virality happens in two phases.
Hmm.
People love it, so they
Hmm.
promote it, and then people
Yeah.
hate it, so
Hmm.
they promote it.
Right.
But it
Hmm.
also seems like there's an anticipatory element to that, that like
Hmm.
some of what must be attracting the lovers to it is the anticipation of the haters. Like
I'm
this
not
is like it would,
sure.
even if it's not specifically like they're going to hate this poem, it's like
Yeah.
this is a sentiment or a cause or a perspective that will clash with, that vindicates me against them.
Well, I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, well,
I
please.
think the first wave of sharers are very like earnest. I don't think they're necessarily
Yeah,
anticipating
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like a battle. Uh,
Right.
you
Right.
know, this second wave, that those are the folks that are more media savvy, and
Okay. Okay.
those are the folks who are coming up with these clever quips and dunks and things like that.
Is it so? Because I couldn't tell reading the responses if the is the second wave usually, are the like on average, are
Mhm.
the haters more likely to be like, are we talking about poems where there's an alternation between lovers and haters, or is this the same group of lovers and the same group of haters for most of these poems? Do you think? Like,
Oh,
because
interesting.
it sounds like some of
Yeah.
those haters, I
Mhm.
could imagine them having a hard time
Mhm.
sincerely sharing a poem and saying like, but this is a good, like it feels like that, unless they were, unless it was like somebody who, there are
Mhm.
some guys in there who feel like
Mhm.
they would sort of point to, some brand name
Mhm.
dead for hundreds of years poet and say, well, this was real poetry.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point, which is the types of people that tend to quote tweet poems to dunk on them, they don't typically share poems that they love. You know,
Right, right, right.
it's not like this is what I hate and this is what I love. It's more like this is what I hate, this is what I hate, this is what I hate,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is what I'm
yeah.
angry about today. Can you believe like, you know, they're sort of like serial complainers.
Yeah,
But you know, this is something that I mention at the end of my essay, which is that, you know, almost nobody buys poetry
yeah,
books,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So most people today in 2025 encounter poetry by seeing it pop up on their feed, you know, not
Mm.
in a book of poems, and they see it with commentary, they see it in um, you know, they see it in this social architecture of social media, and you know, they're sort of rushed to judgment. They're rushed to read and produce a take. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's kind of like these platforms don't really encourage someone to sit quietly and to read a poem and be like, "Oh, I love that. Let me share that." You know, except for Instagram. Like Instagram does, and I make this distinction.
Instagram's like the nice one, the
Yeah,
nice social
yeah,
medium. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So people will obviously, like, people do often share poems that they like on Instagram, but on Twitter it's mostly I hate to say it, but unfortunately I mostly see haters.
Yeah, well, it's. I think like what I found really insightful was
Mhm,
if you start with the premise that like, hey, look at these. There are some, poetry is
mhm,
not a big bestseller. It's not as popular as it might be, but there are certain poems that get read a lot online, and your ultimate response is sort of, well, actually, no, they're not being read. They're either being commented on, or they're being
mhm.
reacted to, or
Right.
they're or on Instagram it may be that they're sort of being looked at,
Mhm,
or like
mhm.
curated. And it
Yeah.
is it is like
Mhm,
I think of the, I mean, I don't know enough to know how these divides go, but my association is that Instagram is the Insta poets, right? That it's not, unless you're like Patricia Lockwood, who is really sort of like a one-liner artist, like a stand-up comedian style poet. Like the Twitter, it's Instagram is the medium for the sincere, swoony Ruby Kaur's and all of her imitators and the Long Leave and all those guys.
mhm. So I think that is a big part of it. I think by the numbers, that by far is the majority, you know, but like I follow a lot of writers on Instagram, and they will like take a photo of a page in a poetry book that they're reading and, you know, post that
Yeah,
to their stories. And that's not Instagram poetry, you know? So
right.
I feel like people on Instagram just they do share what they love. Whereas people on Twitter more so lean towards sharing what they hate. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah.
a difference in the social platforms. Yeah.
And your online biography begins in 2020. You said effectively.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
you're,
really
but
didn't
then,
know anything about.
so what I'm
Yeah.
also just curious, like how much the
Hmm.
all of the big changes in, say,
Hmm.
Twitter have affected this, because my impression from the outside is like
Hmm.
people go to Instagram and it doesn't have the same. It's like it's not as charged one way or the
Yeah.
other.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Facebook has become, I don't know, like a down market country club for old people, but like my impression is like there's Twitter, which is
Uh-huh.
now like just venomous, and then Blue
Hmm.
Sky, which is sort of like dorky and pious. Is that like, but is there, but it seems like there is still enough of like, I keep hearing from people that Twitter is now just so suffused in
Yeah.
like open anti-Semitism or racism
Oh
or
my God,
awfulness that
it's
it's,
terrible. Yeah,
but there
it's
is still
really
some like
bad.
like weird Twitter snarky Twitter, like some of that survives in there.
Well, here's the thing. I think, yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking for sort of up-to-date literary commentary and discourse, that's still where you can find it.
But Twitter,
It's just like yeah, on Twitter, like you just have to scroll past like five racist tweets to get to the one about, I don't know, to get to the one about, Andrea Longshoe
right, right, right. Mhm.
reviewing Ocean Vuong or something like that. So it's in there, and you kind of have to just put up this mental armor and you know, but yeah.
I'm curious. Just it's a slight tangent, but I saw that she's got this new book of S. I guess it's some of it's a collection, which I've only read a handful of things by her. And my impression is always like she's very smart and a very good writer, and like
Mhm.
I often very strongly disagree, but like it's sort of always interesting.
Oh yeah.
Do you follow her much or?
Yeah, I mean, the most recent essay I read was the critique of Ocean Vuong.
Oh, I didn't know she'd done that. I mean,
Yeah,
long
yeah,
time
that's
ago.
been well, see, that's been going viral. That's been going
Yeah.
viral on
Okay.
Twitter over the
Okay.
last few days. Yeah, it was really good. It was an excellent read, and she was sort of calling out sort of gestures that diasporic poets and writers tend to make that
Okay.
she sort of sees as maybe a little lazy, like mystifying linguistic gestures.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd
Uh,
encourage you to read it. It was a
Yeah,
good
no, I will definitely read it.
read.
I got told, I got
Yeah.
told, I got told by listeners
Mhm.
a few years ago that I had to stop talking about Ocean Vuong because it was too like
Yeah.
I'm not not a big fan. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
have like strong feelings, but I am I haven't been bowled over by his poems. But yeah, I'll read the essay. I'd be interested to hear what she has to say about him.
Mhm.
Okay, so no, I do want to come back to the guys on Twitter who complain about things not being
Mhm.
traditional
Yeah.
or formal enough. Like
Mhm.
I'm fascinated by the existence of this
Mhm.
crowd because
Mhm.
my impression is that like they're these tiny little
Mhm.
you know little coves hidden away
Mhm.
where a handful of formal poets will argue amongst themselves. But there are people who are who are out in public yelling at normal people about form.
Yeah. I mean,
What is that? Who are these guys? What is this?
it's well, it's funny. I mean, this is the thing. A lot of these guys, they tend to be anonymous accounts.
Okay,
They
sure.
tend to like be politically conservative, in other
Mm,
ways, and sort of see the fall from form as part of like a larger, I don't know, degeneracy
yeah, okay.
societally. It's part of an entire package of
Right, right,
ideology.
right.
But it's funny because like the thing that I always my response to that, it is that these guys aren't typically reading a lot of contemporary poetry. Like
Yeah.
so again, they're just encountering sort of bad viral contemporary poems, and they're like, oh, all contemporary poems are rubbish, and um but
So, like,
actually
most contemporary poems are rubbish, but that's true of any era, you know?
sure, right. But the, the thing that I wanted to remark was that, a lot of contemporary poets do incorporate formal poetry
Yeah.
into their work. A
Well,
few
that was, I
years
mean,
ago.
so one of
Yeah.
the examples you gave was Amanda Gorman. And I think like, spoken word poets use a lot of rhyme and, semi regular rhythm, if not meter, strictly speaking. So I feel
Sure,
like
but
they've brought a lot of it back in.
I mean on an even more formal level than that. So
Okay.
everything from like Ghazals had a moment a few years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
People
uh,
who
yeah.
there were some lazy guzzles like there were some like, it's a pretty demanding form and I did like I started to get like I started to feel my own crotchety inner man come out with like
Mhm.
inner old man with like the guzzles that really all they did
Yeah.
was repeat a phrase and then cite your name at the end. And I felt
Mhm,
like
mhm.
there's some rhyme. There's a little you got to do
Right.
a little bit of work to make it,
Yeah.
have some spring to it.
No, I
Um,
hear that.
yeah. But yeah, but sorry,
But they
yeah,
definitely had a moment, and
yeah,
villanelles and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
sonnets. Sonnets obviously had a huge resurgence as well. So I just kind of feel like the folks that are complaining about the death of formal poetry, like they're not
Yeah.
even keeping up, because it's like if you read contemporary poets, a lot of them are working in form. It's like, I mean, it might be that in a book of poetry, maybe most of it is free verse, but there
Yeah,
are a
yeah.
few formal poems scattered in there. But I mean, usually there are a few. So I don't know. The argument that like, oh, we don't know how to do it anymore, it just strikes me as, a little silly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm really interested to, excuse me, to hear this because
Hmm.
my, I mean, I gather a little older than you, and I definitely remember being in college at a time when it was there was really no acknowledgement of form as a
Mm,
possibility in contemporary
mm,
poetry, and that it would have seemed very like when occasionally somebody would drift into workshop and bring a poem in meter and rhyme, it was sort of everybody would come snicker quietly and think, well, I guess he just doesn't know. He doesn't know that you don't do that anymore.
mhm.
I mean, it sounds like this is really not the case anymore. That it has
No.
become it's still not
Mhm.
sort of mainstream to write most of your work
Right.
in meter and rhyme, but this is now just sort of becoming one of the tools available.
Yeah, at least in my experience, we had assignments to write formal poems, to
Oh
do
wow, okay.
imitation poems, things like that. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'd like that's surprising. That's, I mean, I think I'm with you in thinking that
Hmm.
it's at least it can't hurt to learn. You don't have to
Right.
do it, but it
Hmm.
can't hurt to learn.
Hmm. Hmm.
So no, I'm glad to hear that.
And
Is
I,
that go
yeah,
ahead?
I tend to think that just like a knowledge, a knowledge of formal poetry, even if you do end up writing mostly in free verse, which is
Yeah,
the case for me, it really helps like train the ear. And
yeah,
I rely primarily on internal rhyme as opposed to end rhyme.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it just was hugely helpful in building in sort of like an underlying lyricism.
No, for
Yeah.
sure. I confess a thing I started doing several years ago was writing poems in conventional and rhymed forms and then re-breaking the lines to bury the rhymes so that the end rhyme became internal rhyme because
Yeah.
they found it was easier to publish that way.
Hmm.
When it didn't announce itself. It was funny because like the one of it may have been the first sentence of your essay. In rereading it, I had a little double take moment.
Hmm.
There's a second sentence before I even read the poem. I noticed the metrics. I had a funny moment where I realized oh, that's what I do, but I mean something different. But is you went to an MFA program? Is that are you is Austin where that was, or is that
Yeah. Hmm.
okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Like, what is the Austin like? Is your poetry world? Is that primarily in Austin, or are you mostly online with people elsewhere?
It's both. Yeah. Like
Okay.
for me, it's definitely both. I find the poetry in the literary scene, and actually just the art scene in general in Austin, to be very cozy. That's like the one word that I would use to describe it. There's definitely like sort of DIY ethos, like,
Yeah,
folks will throw backyard backyard readings,
yeah, yeah,
or just, or will put up an art show in someone's shed,
yeah,
and there's not this same sense of competition, I would say, that you see in like the coastal cities, because I am very online, so I do see like I see and hear about these readings that happen in like New York and LA, and I occasionally go and read,
yeah,
elsewhere. But I'm always like, I just breathe such a sigh of relief whenever I come back to Austin, because it's not as showy of
yeah,
a
yeah,
scene
yeah,
here. It's very friendly. Everyone is excited for like every like, if you like try to create a new initiative or a reading series or a workshop, people
yeah.
are just excited. They're like, yes, another thing to do. Like, in our little town versus where, like I think in New York and LA, if you try to start up an initiative, there's a little bit of a sense of like, well, what are you trying to do? Like that
Right.
the like
It's a zero sum game. So like you're
yeah,
gonna,
there's like
yeah,
they might read a little bit of uppityness into that, or
yeah,
um,
yeah.
so
And there's
I
just less
love
like
the
there's less room
coziness.
to maneuver.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
No,
I love
my
the
impression
coziness.
of Austin a little bit because I lived in Baltimore for a number of years. My impression
Yeah.
was like Austin was like there was a ton of DIY stuff and a lot of just sort of it was very very bohemian. A lot of people living and working in warehouses, sort of thing. It just felt like Austin was like the attractive version of Baltimore.
What
But no,
about where you live
yeah.
now? What is there sort of a literary scene there?
Yes and no. So I live in Carborough, North Carolina, which is a little town adjacent to Chapel Hill,
Okay.
where the university is.
Mhm.
There's a lot of academic poets here. I'm friends with a couple of writers. I mean, I think so. If I were younger and did not have kids, then I think I
Mhm.
would probably live in Durham, which
Mhm.
is nearby, or
Okay.
maybe Raleigh.
Mhm.
And there's a little more nightlife, and there's a little more,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
being a father of small children, I just don't do
Yeah.
much.
I hear
Like
that.
I
Yeah.
just don't have that much going on. There are a lot of very bookish people here. It doesn't feel like there's much of a scene. I know there are people who've sort of tried to cultivate it, but that mostly ends up happening in Durham, in that end
Okay.
of things, which is Durham's a little more of a proper, well, Durham's sort of like the approachable size of city, whereas Chapel Hill is truly a little genteel town, and then Raleigh's kind of like a big faceless southern, city. Yeah, it is a wonderful place to raise small children.
Mhm.
It's a little bit can be a little stultifying if you're, or just sort of, a little. I love living here with the girls.
Mhm.
When I imagine living here after they graduate, I think like, oh, I don't know,
Yeah, I
can
hear
we find something else going on? There is a little outfit that is trying to establish itself as something like New York's Gotham workshop or the Boston Scrub Street. They're kind of trying to
that.
do something similar here.
Mhm.
I don't know. I think you probably just need a certain degree of population density to make that really work, which we don't quite have here. I'm curious, just because my wife would kill me if I didn't ask you. Do you know Stephanie Macias?
Oh yeah.
Oh
Uh-huh.
yeah, she's yeah. My wife loves her. They were supposed to hang out at AWP, and then I had a death so in the family, so we missed it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
she
we
was in my
yeah
program. She might even have been in my year, but in the fiction cohort. So
yeah
yeah,
she
yeah.
writes stories.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah, it seems like it is a kind of like a friendly, nice place to to be an artist. And I see even just like the images behind you. My impression, maybe partly from like Ashbery and Frank O'Hara, is that there's a like I associate contemporary art or like
Hmm.
art connoisseurs or art school people with sort of more avant-garde poetry is and then looking at some of your poetry, it seems like there's actually several different things going on in the different poems of
Hmm.
yours I read. Like it wasn't like I identified one particular style,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
like, do you think of your work as being avant-garde or as being experimental, or like, do you think of it as being anything, or is it
I
just
think I
you're just
think that's
writing?
such a fun question because I ask myself that all the time. And when I was putting together my poetry collection, which I'll shill in a moment, but
Yeah, yeah, please do, please do.
when I was putting together my book, which was also my MFA thesis, I was really concerned about that. I was like, look, I do a lot of different styles, like you know, um, content wise, like like different topics, themes,
Yeah, yeah.
forms. I experiment a lot, and I sort of just like went to my thesis advisor and was like, I don't think this is gonna hold together because like it literally, I was like, I don't know if like you could even read two poems and think that they're by the same person.
Right.
But I think she kind of calmed me down and was like, no, you know what, like you can't sort of think that way. Like you gotta every single poem that you write, that just you have to focus on making that poem great, like in
Yeah.
the context of that poem, and not think about how it fits in your book or anything like that.
Yeah.
And in the end, like trust me, it'll all come together. And I found that to be very much the case. When I put my collection together, even though I had tried so many, like so many different styles. Like there was obviously like an overarching voice that was
Yeah,
mine.
yeah, yeah.
You know, like
It
that,
comes
it came
together. Yeah.
through. And in fact, in some ways, it almost came through more strongly because of all the different styles. Like, I feel like there's that one thread
Yeah.
actually,
You sort of see the one common
highlighted.
element across
Yeah,
these.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right, right. But I love experimenting. And so, like some of my poems are like very like sparse but lyrical. Other ones are like wordier, and I try to like, sometimes I'll experiment with like esoteric vocabulary or jargon.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've used in like a couple of poems, like one of them that you read, I'll incorporate lines that I've generated with an AI tool along with my own, obviously along with my own own lines,
Yeah.
and sort of collage, so that in a way that, it's impossible to tell what's human and what's AI. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I don't do that. No,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just sort of like twiddle my thumbs for the most part and wait for the muse.
And I'm assuming that DM's one was at least partly like found,
Mhm.
like this, like you drawn. I'm assuming at least some of those were real DMs, or maybe not. Maybe you authored
Oh,
all of them.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh no, they were all
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, I have a poem called DMs, and it's basically just lines of conversation that people have.
It's a great
Yeah,
collection of little zingers. I mean, it's
yeah.
yeah, and it yeah,
Yeah, no,
just
those are
placing them all
real.
next to
Those
one
are
another.
real. It
Yeah.
literally, those are all things that people have messaged me. Some from like very intimate friends and others from like complete strangers. So,
Yeah, yeah.
mhm,
There is a type of poetry that it's not just one style necessarily, because I see it
mhm,
in like some of Robert Lowell's poems, and I also
mhm,
see it in like some very contemporary or avant-garde poems, and I see it in some of these the sort of like a series of one-liner poems, or like it almost feels like a collection of aphorisms where
mhm,
there's a starting from scratch, like you set yourself at rest, and then take a new swing with every line rather than allowing yourself to
mhm.
build in momentum. And it's when you can pull that off, it's really dazzling, and it is so alien to me. It's like it is wild to be able to write that way. But it sounds like you're still just enjoying like a variety of approaches.
Yeah, I don't typically write that way. Yeah, I would say, if I had well, so one of my blurbers, Ryan Ruby, who blurred my collection that's coming out, said that my writing was like I'm not saying this, by the way. Somebody else is saying it, so I'm not tooting my own horn.
You're just quoting a blurb. That's
Yeah, I'm
all.
just
Yeah.
quoting that. He kind of said that my writing was a mix of like Frank O'Hara and Sylvia Plath. So
Okay. That is an odd combination, but a compelling one. That's a lot. There's a lot to respond. It's got to be strong flavors mixed in there.
yeah.
Um, so a little, and it wasn't even a quibble, but it was like a thought that occurred to me
Hmm. Hmm.
reading your conclusion, which I think was really sort of devastating. Like these
Hmm.
poems aren't getting read. Like it's not
Hmm.
reading that's happening,
Hmm.
something
Yeah.
else that's
Hmm.
happening, and the poems are sort of the tokens being used
Yeah.
for this process, or these different processes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In the same way that like the joke about the New Yorker poems is that they're like it's a different version of the New Yorker squiggles, right? Where it's like it doodles, like
Yes.
it's another way to fill
Yep.
space and
Hmm.
like have an interesting shaped thing in between the article.
Right. Hmm.
But the like a thought I have had in the past just about, I'm not it's not my thought, it's lots of people have had about poetry online, is like there's a new life to just the passing along of one poem that you love. Because like my
Hmm.
I think a complaint I had, and it's probably dating back to like the stuff I was reacting to when I was in college, was
Hmm.
um, that I didn't think a lot of people actually liked the stuff that was getting celebrated. Like that
Hmm.
they were celebrating it for being smart, or for asking interesting
Hmm.
questions, or for being affiliated with something. But or even like Kenneth Goldsmith's heyday, like it's not even meant to be read. And
Uh-huh.
so my reaction to that was like, what if you just liked a poem and you really liked it, and then you just passed this and said, read
Hmm.
this one poem, it's really great. When you read it, you will enjoy it. And I've seen like the
Hmm.
Twitter or various media online as being a way to do that.
Hmm.
on a different scale than we've been able to in the past. Rather than like passing around a sheet of paper in the court of, King Henry VIII,
Mhm.
you're able to spread this to lots of different people. But it also made me wonder about what your, because you talk. I mean, it's the last line, and one of the comments sort of even made a point of saying, there's something really essential to the last line of this essay, which is I'll read the paragraph, last two sentences. So maybe viral poems are not only inherently bad, maybe virality itself corrupts our ability to engage with poetry.
Mhm.
In our rush to signal our tastes and allegiances through takes, we've forgotten how to sit quietly with a poem, allowing it to work on us slowly, mysteriously, beyond the metrics of social validation. And
Mhm.
it seemed to me that you were sort of pointing at something about your own experience with poetry, something about like what you
Yeah.
value or what you hope for as a reader. Like, what do you want when
Yeah.
you go to a poem?
Yeah, I mean, I want to feel transported, not necessarily sort of like just like in a lazy escapist way, but
Sure.
I almost want like a metaphysical experience, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
most poems don't do that,
Yeah.
and it's okay, but like ideally that's what I want. And that's kind of the polar opposite of going onto social media, especially on Twitter, where I
Yeah.
have to scroll past like five racist tweets and then maybe see a poem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like it's the polar opposite. But I don't know. I've also discovered a lot of really great writers, through social media. So, um, a lot of good has come with the bad. So,
This is like Substack recommending
yeah.
your essay right before I delete
Right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, it's funny too. Speaking of Substack,
Yeah.
it was brought to my attention that this essay went viral on um like on what's it called? Hacker News.
Oh, I don't know that. What is
It's
Hacker
like
News?
it's basically like a tech um
Huh.
like news congregation site.
Oh, well, I mean,
So
you wrote a well-informed essay about what goes viral, and that's probably exactly what they're interested in.
sure, but the discussion on that in the comments of that website amongst, mostly like software engineers and computer scientists about this essay was so fascinating.
What did
Just
they see
because,
in it?
well, this is the thing that I found is that like folks that are like completely outside the writing world, right? Like sometimes they have the strongest takes and preferences on all of this stuff, and so like a lot of you know I don't want to be cynical, but I think a lot of
Please,
people that
please.
well, yeah, I'm not trying to be mean, but I think a lot of people that are not involved at all in the writing or literary worlds and are working like say like a job in tech, like they will signal like an interest in or an opinion about poetry to sort of like almost like humanize like in a way. I mean, like sort of Ben Lerner talks about this in Hatred of Poetry,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
poetry is the medium that we use to signal our humanity and to prove that we have a soul, you know.
yeah. Like
Um,
that's the Curtis Yarvin thing. That's the thing I find most like bewildering about him. That he's like his own vision of himself is that he's a poet. Like he writes,
oh yeah,
like
I'm
wretched
familiar,
poetry on
yeah.
top of
Hmm.
insane
Hmm.
like crypto fascist plans for the new America. But like that's a thing that there are like sincere poetry readings happening in like hardcore neo reactionary New York. That like it's that poetry is a way of indicating your allegiance or your identity or your
Hmm.
values, but for everybody in different ways. Like in the same, like my mom will recommend like some mushy, vaguely spiritual poem she heard on Being, and then there's Bryn just sent me like a Megan Kelly's favorite poet the other day, which was a fascinating discovery for me. Basically like a very boring middle of the road standard issue like academic progressive poet, but just right coded.
Mm.
But yeah, it is so it is something like poetry means something to these guys, and they were then encountering somebody writing critically about it in a way that they were not used to. Is that how you think it they
Yeah,
were
I mean, no, the discussion was pretty good actually. I mean, some people sort of, agreed with it, and other folks were like, well, um, you know, like sort of like let people enjoy things, Um,
yeah, yeah.
but but it was interesting just to see that level of investment in discourse. Like literally, people were writing like paragraphs worth of arguments on Hacker News in response to
Yeah.
this essay. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. No, that's I mean that's
hmm,
terrific.
yeah.
It's having an impact. There was one comment I found kind of interesting because it seemed to identify a slight to me it felt like it was a different but pretty related
Hmm,
phenomenon, which is
hmm,
so this person who's just listed as Nightpool on here um, said, I think when I think about viral poems, I have a very different canon that comes to mind, including Wendy Cope's The Orange,
hmm.
Michael Harris Having a Coke with You, Maggie Smith's Good Bones, Philip Larkin's This Be the Verse, and Laura, is it Laura Gilpin? I hadn't known Two Headed Calf this one before.
Yeah.
Laura Gilpin's
Hmm,
Two
hmm,
Headed
yeah.
Calf. And reading back through, I mean, I knew most of those already, but reading back through them, it occurred to me that those are all poems that they're relatively easy to get something from.
Hmm, hmm.
And it is difficult to identify a political polarity to them. Because so, like, whether it's a generational divide or a political divide, like a lot
Hmm.
of the poems you're talking about,
Yeah.
one way or another, they kind of signal an allegiance or a side. It's like having a pH balance, like
Yeah.
they signal like I'm on the base end or I'm on the acid end.
Yeah.
And these poems were all, I think, there's I love Philip Larkin, I love Wendy Cope. I mean, there's some good poets and
Mhm,
good,
mhm,
lines in here, but these are all poems that sort of, it is not hard to extract some kind of
mhm,
juice from them as a reader on a first read. And if you share them online, it does not necessarily feel like you're signaling anything.
mhm,
And these are poems that have gone viral. They also tend to be not as often poems by
mhm.
living poets or
Yeah.
sorry, poets who are, I mean, Wendy Cope is alive, as is Maggie Smith, and presumably Laura Gilpin. But these are not like current Twitter poets sharing their own poems and then having them go viral. This is somebody else reading a poem in a book and
Mhm.
sharing it. And it
Yeah.
does feel like it has there's like it feels like it's not the same phenomenon you're talking about, but
Yes.
it is maybe
Mhm.
occurring like in the shadow of that phenomenon or in a
You
related
know,
way.
it's really fascinating because you're not the first person that's pointed this out to me. Actually, I was talking about this essay with a friend, and he said, "What's the difference between going viral and becoming canonical?"
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right? I mean, essentially, what you're talking about is the spread of popularity.
Right, right, right.
Um,
And
um,
those tend to be
yeah.
more one-sided popularity. Like those tend to be those poems. There are people who dislike them, but the backlash is not part of the phenomenon of their
Right.
popularity.
No, 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 you're completely right. I do see it as very different. Yeah, I think you're right that they hit this like level between it's like just the right amount of accessible, but
Yeah,
also, but also has appeal for the heads,
yeah, yeah.
Like
It
it,
doesn't feel too trite or easy or on the
right,
surface.
exactly. But it's interesting, right? Because I do think that those poems became popular sort of before the phenomenon I'm talking about came into full force.
Because yeah, you were talking about. I mean, the poems you cite are all 2024 poems,
Hmm,
and so
hmm. Yeah,
is this phenomenon of this kind of double-edged
yeah.
virality specifically like a latter day Twitter phenomenon?
I think it is. I mean,
Okay,
I'm sure to some extent it's always existed, but I
right.
really think it's like a post 2022.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
phenomenon even. Like I think it's a very sort of at least in terms of like at this level, I think
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
pretty recent phenomenon.
The
Yeah.
good bones wouldn't catch fire today in the way that it did whenever it came out several years ago.
I think they would, but I think they would occasion a backlash.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There would be some like, what kind of mother is, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that probably is right. I mean, it does because it is like it is so difficult to put your finger on any single element in the culture at all that is not immediately charged with some
Hmm.
polar value one
Hmm.
way or the other.
But
Um,
with these poems, I actually see them go semi-viral like fairly regularly. Like every
oh,
once,
like these come back into,
yeah, like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
every
yeah.
7 months someone will post two-headed calf again and it'll go
Right,
viral
right, right.
again. And that one doesn't seem to occasion as much backlash. Like sometimes people will
Yeah,
quote tweet it and be like, I don't get why this one is popular, but
right. What are you going to
there's nothing
hate about it?
specific to dunk on. Yeah, yeah, right.
I hate genetic freak animals who live
Exactly.
only a few hours before they die. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I wonder too. Like, do you think are there new like is your essay what virality looks like now, or could there be versions of this kind of virality, this like non double edged virality that are not from grandfathered in poems? Because these
Yeah,
poems
on
are all grandfathered.
Instagram.
Like, yeah.
On Instagram, it happens
Oh,
all the
Instagram.
time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
you're
so
right.
on
Yeah, yeah,
other
yeah.
social platforms, the reaction is overwhelmingly positive
Right.
to these poems that are shared. It's just specifically on Twitter where
Twitter.
it's,
Yeah, it has to be. It has to have
yeah.
a positive or negative charge of some kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that probably makes sense. Yeah, I'm. So you want to be transported. You want something. It sounds like almost like one of the guys I talk to frequently who has a podcast that's all about meter is big on the sublime. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is sort of like a psychedelic, like Jewish mysticism kind of
Hmm.
perspective,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it sounds almost like a little bit of that, like something not so
Right.
far from that you're really
Right.
after, but maybe through different means.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of a woo-woo mystic
Okay,
myself,
all right,
so, you
all
know.
right. Yeah, there. No, well, yeah, there plenty of plenty of listeners are will gripe at me about being too small minded for that kind of stuff. But yeah, I am yeah, I'm fascinated by just like what different modes of poetry and what different schools or camps or scenes emerge. Here's a question, because I am always interested by like what people perceive the norm to be.
Hmm.
So there's like you have your scene in Austin, and you have your kind of
Hmm.
like your
Hmm.
online Twitter people,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
there's the various academic kinds of poets you bumped into here and there.
Hmm.
How would you characterize like normal or mainstream poetry today? Like if there is a poetry establishment, or if there's a sort of like most poetry, or what's at the
Yeah.
center and what's at the fringe?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's definitely institutional poetry, right? There's an establishment for sure. It revolves around the university system. It revolves around a lot of publications that have just had their NEA grants pulled.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
that kind of represents, I think, mainstream poetry to me. But there's also, yeah, there are sort of freewheeling internet poets and small indie presses that are publishing poems both on websites as well as in print.
Yeah.
And those actually, they get a lot of views and a lot of book sales as well. It's funny because, I'll look at, the Paris Review will tweet, you know, an essay or something like that. And you'll just see like it has no engagement whatsoever, right? And then a small indie press will tweet something and it like gets like, a good amount of engagement. And so I think that because of, the advent of social media, it's been possible for um, writers outside of the establishment to get noticed and to sell books. Yeah, like there's just sort of I don't think there's like a monopoly, you know,
Do
I
you
yeah,
do you see a dominant style?
dominant style like
Yeah, like
in the
I don't know, like
establishment or on the
well, no, I
internet.
mean, I guess yeah. I'm
Yeah.
curious just because I
Hmm.
hear people
Hmm.
complain what like so what I sometimes hear is free verse poets complaining that all establishment all of the poetry establishment
Hmm.
is devoted to meter and rhyme, and then every
Oh,
metrical poet I know complaining
yeah.
that that everybody in the Academy abhors meter and rhyme, which is not true either. But I'm curious, like those are not the only two poles, and they're not as
No.
polar
Hmm.
as they used to be either.
No.
I'm just
Mm-mm.
curious, like what because you do identify talkie free verse, prose poetry, and
Spoken word.
spoken word, yeah, as kind of like three familiar contemporary modes,
Yeah. Hmm.
recognizable contemporary modes.
Yeah.
Do you see like if you had to characterize, what is American poetry today? How would you, yeah, how would you characterize it?
Well, there's that. I guess this is kind of goes to like your original question. I mean, there's multiple patches,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because like the people that are watching like spoken word videos on YouTube, and these, they'll get thousands and thousands of views,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
so if you're talking about like pure numbers, right?
Mm,
Like how many people are exposed to a poem, right? Like maybe the YouTubers or the Instagram poets, like they have more views or more readers,
yeah.
um, but are they considered? They're not establishment poetry world folks,
Right. There's
right?
not,
So
yeah, there's not an
yeah,
institution behind, yeah.
right, right. So what is American poetry today? Well, there's like sort of the populist, there's the populist um, YouTubers or,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
Instagram poets. But then
Christian spoken word is like what I, at least last time I looked on YouTube, like Christian spoken word is huge, like
wait,
millions and millions of
wait,
views on,
seriously?
yeah. Oh
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
familiar. That's so
Like
funny.
my impression was that it was
Oh my
bigger
gosh.
than like other artsy, like non-religious
Oh,
spoken word. Like it's
I gotta
often
check
like
that
very
out.
well produced videos.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty bit like looking at the numbers, I was kind of my mind was blown a little bit.
Wow. Okay, cool, cool. I'll check it out.
I mean, I did not see any of it that I thought was good as poetry, but it is a big phenomenon. It's like it's a real thing that's happening. It's sort of
Yeah.
like if you try to talk about American entertainment, you don't mention Mr. Beast. It's just like not my cup of tea, but it's a huge thing. Well, yeah, tell us a little bit about you've got a book that you put
Yes.
together, but this was your MFA manuscript, but you also are publishing it now.
Yes, yeah.
What's the story? Yeah,
Yeah,
what is it?
so it's my like full-length debut collection. It is sort of a reworking of my MFA manuscript. It's called Cataclysm Moves Me, I Regret to Say.
All right,
Yeah, and it's coming out end of June.
all right, uh,
Um, through
terrific.
House
Yeah.
of Flag Press, which is a nice indie press that I found on Twitter.
What so what was your how did you looked up different presses? Like what did you look for when you were trying to figure out how to get published? What was that process
Yeah,
like on your end? Yeah.
I did the contest circuit,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for like a year and a half. And it was just like it just got really sick of like waiting, 5, 6 months for a response. It was always no. And I wasn't even getting like to the finalist stage.
Yeah,
So I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
this is really hopeless.
It's a miserable process. Yeah.
So I follow all these presses online. I actually just reached out directly to the guy that runs this press and was like, hey, like, because we'd been following each other for a while. So
So you had some sense of who like of your mutual sense of style or
yeah, I mean, he published, I wouldn't say any of the poets that he's published are similar to me in style, but
okay.
he's published a lot of writers who are sort of like in my larger social sphere.
Okay.
Um, and
In
who,
Austin or like in the
no, just
yeah,
just like
okay.
everywhere,
Sure.
but who I know sort of through the internet.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so I don't know, I just I'd heard that he was really great to work with and he has
Okay.
been. So yeah.
Yeah, I will be. I won't be on the Substack app, scroll feed, whatever
Oh,
thing. But I
that's
will. But I'll look for your writing from
thank
now on.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and after we get off this call, the first thing I'm gonna do is Google Christian spoken words. So
I mean, I was. It was for some. I forget. I was having to research something, and I just watched like hours of Christian spoken word, and it is.
so funny.
I don't. Yeah, I can't say I have. I liked any of it, but
Are
it
they
was.
Protestant? Are they Catholic? Like
I
what?
think they're like American non-denominational.
Okay,
I
okay,
think
yeah.
it feels very much like the vibe I get, and I don't know if this is just because like I'm getting like I'm getting like middle-aged white man ad targets, but like there are a lot of the YouTube ads I see now are like guys who like have my same police description, wearing a flat brim hat and telling you like that they can free you from the shackles of porn. That's what they're
That's
selling. It feels like those are the same guys making the Christian spoken word videos. Yeah.
very likely,
No, I
yeah.
mean, there's also like, well, I should say like, there's also a lot of. It's a very racially diverse genre, but it
Uh-huh.
is like there's a certain kind
Yeah.
of self seriousness and like it does. Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of institutional legacy behind these. It feels like a lot of people kind of. I mean, like American Christianity, like
Yeah, yeah.
individuals freelancing their own version of Christianity.
Damn, that makes me patriotic.
That was my conversation with Stephanie Yu Duhem. Go pre-order her book, Cataclysm Moves Me, I Regret to Say, from House of Vlad Press, and read her article, Only Bad Poems Go Viral. You can reach me, as always, at sleerickets@gmail.com. You can also, if you join the Secret Show, you can send in a poem for Listener Crit, and it will be anonymously and frankly discussed in a main feed episode. I'm going to be recording a Listener Crit episode with Alice coming up soon, and I hope to do another one with Cameron as well at some point. But you are always welcome. If you subscribe to The Secret Show, you are always welcome to send in a poem for Listener Crit. If you enter your email address into Substack, I will give you a week's access to The Secret Show for free. You can listen to 149 episodes up there now. After that, it's pretty cheap. And if you have difficulty, if you have a real hard time paying for it, but you would very much like to, then please write to me and I will hook you up. And if you have a little extra expendable income, then consider signing up to be a motherfucker of the arts. It's a little more every month, and you will be supporting the show and supporting those who listen to it as well. Thank you all for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.